Oh, well, if it isn't my favorite game of all time, Secret of Mana. No, I'm not exaggerating here. This action RPG hybrid truly is my favorite game of all time. Ah, yes, I remember being a kid and renting it because I thought the box art looked cool. Upon actually playing it, I was immediately captivated by its vivid art style, lush environments, and evocative music. Each week I would sit in class wistfully thinking about renting it again and getting back to that incredible world of magic, monsters, and mushroom men. The weekends couldn't come fast enough, and I must have rented it a dozen times before convincing my parents to finally buy it. It was one of those rare games that did everything perfectly in my 11-year-old eyes. Which means now, unfortunately, it's time for grown-up Motron to throw some cold water on everything by turning an unbiased critical eye to my once-beloved Secret of Mana and reviewing it with cold, clinical impartialness. Being an adult sucks sometimes, but oh well. Here we go. Actually, wait a second. Before we get started on the review, please consider liking and subscribing if you're enjoying the content. Also consider supporting me on Patreon, where you can see behind-the-scenes videos and get a shout-out in the credits, and maybe even have your face displayed all huge in an upcoming video. Look, this could be you! Either way, I'm glad to have you here. Now let's get on with the review. Secret of Mana! Released in 1993, this was one of the few games developed and published by Square that was released on the Super Nintendo in North America. And funny enough, this game is actually a sequel to another game that saw a North American release. That game? Final Fantasy Adventure for the original Game Boy. Doesn't make a lot of sense, I know, but if you've played Final Fantasy Adventure, you probably noticed it was a bit different from every other Final Fantasy game. Well, that's because it was a completely different game that they slapped the Final Fantasy name on because they knew it had clout and they wanted to move units. Rather than turn-based combat, this game was an action RPG hybrid that used all the familiar RPG elements, like magic, hit points, and leveling up, but blended them with a real-time Zelda-like combat system. You also had the ability to whack townsfolk, which I'm sorry to say did not carry through to subsequent entries in the series. It was a rather ambitious title for its time, and it's actually held up rather well over the years. Well, when it came time to make its sequel, Secret of Mana, they once again wanted to get ambitious, as evidenced by the fact that this game was originally conceived as a launch title for the Super NES CD-ROM. Wait, what? Is what you might be saying right now. And I guess I gotta explain this thing for a bit. See, Nintendo at one point had their head on straight and knew that CDs were the format of the future. So, in 1990, they announced that they were partnering with Sony to develop a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. Yeah, that's what that weird little port at the bottom of the console would have been used for. Sony was also planning a Nintendo-compatible hybrid console called the PlayStation, which they revealed at the June 1991 Consumer Electronics Show, only for Nintendo to announce the next day at the same show that they were partnering with Philips, Sony's main rival, instead. Well, Sony didn't take that too kindly and responded by, being super successful. As for that Nintendo and Philips partnership, well, nothing really came of that.
Well, actually...
Nothing really came of that! But before that shit hit that fan, Square was already developing Secret of Mana to take advantage of the much larger storage space that the SNES CD-ROM would have afforded. Which meant that when the system was cancelled, they had to truncate and squeeze everything they'd been working on into a vanilla SNES cartridge. Word has it that something like 40% of their planned content got cut, which is a devastatingly large amount of game when you think about it. But let's take a closer look at what we did get and see if it's any good. We'll start with the story. Turns out that mana is no secret. In fact, it's mentioned right there in the prologue that it was the source of power used by an ancient civilization to build the Mana Fortress, a massive weapon. This misuse of mana was not taken lightly by the gods, who subsequently sent beasts to destroy it and everyone else. Using the Mana Sword, a hero destroyed the fortress and returned peace to the land, but at the cost of most of civilization and mana itself. After this rather stern introduction, we flash forward to simpler times, with your main character and his dumbass friends goofing around a waterfall. Like many RPGs of the time, you get to name the characters, but apparently his canonical name is Randy, so I'm just gonna call him the boy, because I really don't want to call him Randy, or any of the other names in these save files for that matter. Anyways, the boy goofs around a little too hard and falls down the waterfall, eventually stumbling upon the Mana Sword. A ghostly apparition then commands him to remove the sword, which he does, and this happens. When he gets back to the village, the Elder tears a strip out of him for removing the legendary object and unleashing monsters. Despite doing a pretty good job taking care of this one monster, they still kick him out, and I remember being legitimately sad about this when I played it as a kid. Like, did they have to go so hard on him? For the first part of the game, you're sort of roaming the countryside, bouncing between a handful of areas, learning about the significance of the sword, as well as the mana seeds, which appear to both energize the sword and keep mana sealed away. Along the way, you're joined by the girl, a daughter of a nobleman from the local kingdom of Pandora, as well as the sprite, a little shit who's lost his memory and living with dwarves. Your introduction to these characters is memorable, and they do a good job interweaving their own individual motivations into your quest. The girl, for example, is in love with Diluk, a commanding officer of the king's army who's been kidnapped early on. Depending on certain decisions you make, you could either meet her when she rescues you from goblins, or you could rescue her from wolves in the forest. And apparently these little narrative variations were intended to be commonplace on the full CD version, but got cut. The somewhat branching paths at the beginning were all we got, and if you need proof that we're dealing with a glitchy, partially implemented feature, check out what happens when you talk to the girl's dad here before you name her. Alright dude, I'm leaving. Your quest eventually takes you out of the starting area by way of cannon, and from there you're off to find the remaining mana seeds. You soon learn that there are other forces seeking out the seeds, primarily the nefarious Empire. Yes, the evil Empire cliché is beyond played out now, but back in 1993 it still had a little novelty to it, so I'll allow it. What does the Empire want with the seeds? Well, apparently they want to break the seals and use the mana contained within to resurrect the Mana Fortress, which is bad news, dudes. Since you're after the seeds to power up your sword, your paths are naturally going to cross once or twice. Here's something that irked me about the Empire, though. The main generals are all kind of boring. I mean, Thanatos is cool, but Geshtar, Fana, Sheiks, completely interchangeable. They look like Kiddio. And when you fight them as bosses, not only do they look nothing like the characters, but their names have switched. Who or what the hell is Egagropilon? It really breaks the cohesion, and you don't really get that, oh shit, I'm finally fighting insert key villain here feeling the way you do with Final Fantasy. But maybe I'm being pedantic. You do find yourselves in some pretty fun predicaments as the story unfolds, however, like when you're lost in the desert and get picked up by a military sand ship, or here when you notice villagers are getting brainwashed and spirited off to some zombie ruins. Or here. Okay, you see this boss? Try to guess who this is, and I guarantee your guess won't be as ridiculous as the actual answer. Did you guess? Okay, here's the answer. Bam! Santa Claus. Yeah, Santa gets corrupted by evil magic and you have to snap him out of it, which really threw me for a loop as a kid. I remember being like, so you're telling me any game could just stick Santa Claus in there? The story moves along at a brisk pace, which I like, and you're always heading off to new areas. The reason you're heading off there isn't always clear or sensical, however. There's one part of the game where you're told you need to speak with Sage Jock. Problem is, the guy keeps pulling a pokeroo and disappearing by the time you get there, with his assistant telling you need to go to the Gold City or the Moon Palace or Tasnica, and eventually you start to wonder why the hell you need to talk to this guy. I gotta give the story props for getting really dire near the end though, because, spoiler alert, they bring back the Mana Fortress. We even get this holy shit moment where they blow up the mana tree. Oh yeah, there's a tree as well. Probably should have mentioned that. There's also a plot twist involving the Emperor where we see who the true villain is, all coalescing into a final climactic battle with the Mana Beast, who the gods sent to take out that fortress and subsequently the whole world once and for all! Whew! Pretty fun stuff. And while not on par with the sweeping epic like Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI, it's well done. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty details, we could talk about the dialogue in the game, which is fine, because there is stuff we could talk about. Word has it the script needed to be localized in 30 days. On top of that, not a lot of dialogue could fit on screen at once due to the text size, meaning some of the more robust conversations had to get truncated. What we end up getting can feel a bit quick and sloppy at times. We don't get a whole lot of text to build out characters like Sergo or Mad Mara. The upside is we get some genuine oddball stuff like the Scorpion Gang saying hubba hubba, or the girl saying she would rather get her gums scraped than give this guy a back rub. It also means that some of the exposition is mercifully short, which, let me tell you, is fantastic. I'm currently playing Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and I'm losing my mind with how much all of these assholes talk. In Secret of Mana, the boy watches the mana tree blow up, then learns it's his mother, and then the sprite basically just says, get your shit together and let's go, and then we're off to the Mana Fortress. Easy peasy. Thank you! Overall, it's a better than most story. Which means we can get into other areas of the general game design, starting with the most notable design choice, the action RPG hybrid gameplay. What we're looking at here is not quite Final Fantasy, but not quite Zelda either. While you do have full control of your character, there are elements of the RPG genre that rein in the action somewhat. For example, you actually can't just start wailing on any enemy with your weapon. Doing so will just yield these pathetically weak hits. In order to hit the enemy for a worthwhile amount, you need to wait for the attack bar at the bottom to fully reach 100% after every time you swing your weapon. This little time gap brings the pacing in line with turn-based RPGs, and I like it, to be quite honest. Giving your attack a cooldown time allows you to move and position yourself for the next attack and think more about the enemy's counterattack. And with 2 other characters on your team, it prevents things from just being a big old whacking scrum. Which brings me to the weapons. In the early parts of the game, you gain access to 8 different weapons: sword, glove, spear, whip, axe, bow, boomerang, and javelin. Each weapon is different in the ways you would expect, although some are a little too similar in my opinion. They could have given the bow more range, or have made the boomerang able to hit enemies on the way back, since they both are kind of the same otherwise. You can upgrade each weapon by finding corresponding orbs and bringing them to Watts the blacksmith. Upgrading them gives them a new name and look, plus it brings up their attack power, and also makes it so a character can increase their individual mastery level with that weapon by using it. Leveling it up allows you to level it up. Confusing, I know, but look, here's my main guy's individual mastery level with each weapon. This number here can only go up to the level you have that weapon upgraded to. So the sword is Excalibur, which is the level 5 upgrade, so the mastery cannot go above level 5. What does increasing your mastery do? Check out the attack bar below. If I hold the attack button after hitting, I can charge up my next attack. Level 2 mastery means I can charge it up twice for a nice little slap. Level 8 mastery means I can charge it all the way up 8 times and release hell. Each level of charge has its own unique animation, and for 8 weapons and 8 different mastery levels, that's a whopping 64 different animations. Some weapons also have environmental uses, like how the axe breaks rocks and the whip helps you cross gaps. But this kind of feels like an unnecessary obstacle, since it just means you have to equip the weapon, do the thing, then unequip it in order to move on. If weapons make an appearance, then you can bet armor also makes an appearance. You can equip 3 pieces of armor: headgear, body armor, and an accessory, which confers stat boosts as well as certain invulnerabilities to status effects. Here's the thing though, you can't see any of this when you're shopping for armor. You kinda just have to trust that more expensive means better. When equipping, you can see how much it improves your defensive stat, but as far as the status protections go, it isn't indicated anywhere, and you kinda just have to be pleasantly surprised when you suddenly stop taking poison damage. Also, while I don't mind the fact that there are ridiculous pieces of armor, don't try and tell me that this dragon helm is somewhat weaker than this duck helm. You get access to a respectable number of items in this game that do anything from curing you to sticking a barrel on your head. The problem is you can only carry 4 of each consumable item, which defies all logic. So I can carry 4 barrels but not 5 walnuts? How big are those walnuts? You can buy these items from a shop or find them in treasure chests that are dropped by enemies. Just be careful with the treasure chests because they can contain traps that range from stupid to devastating. Look how brutal this goddamn mimic box is. Shit. Shit. Woo! Wowee. Alright, so far we're checking off all the RPG boxes, which means it's time to talk about magic. Magic is bestowed upon your characters by way of these little elemental spirits who you gather as the plot unfolds. Undine for water, Gnome for earth, Sylphid for wind, Salamando for fire, Shade for darkness, Lumina for light, Luna for moon, and Dryad for wood. Tree? I don't know. Each spirit comes with 3 spells for either the girl, the sprite, or both, with the sprite's magic being mostly offensive and the girl's defensive. The boy gets nothing, and I love how Undine tries to silver lining it by being like, well, the girl here can cast ice magic on your sword, as if that's not something that could be done to literally any character. Naturally, enemies can have weaknesses to different elements, and a quick scan can tell you what works best. Also, what's cool is that you can level up your magic the same way you can level up your weapons, by using each element a whole bunch. I like how the game did this because it forces you to actually use the spells you pick up, and you do well to level them up because a level 1 spell won't make a dent on some of the later bosses, even if they do have a weakness to it. I'll get into how the magic interweaves with the general gameplay in the gameplay section in this video, so stay tuned for that because I do have some thoughts. For now, let's move on to your companions and see how they fit into the combat. As you can see, they're running around with you nearly at all times, and they do their part when it comes to fighting the bad guys. You can decide how aggressive or standoffish they are using this action grid, which works well enough. They will never cast spells, however, which means if you want to use magic, you gotta do it for them. You can do so by accessing their menu or switching to play as them with the select button. If you're not a fan of CPU-controlled partners, you can instead take advantage of one of the coolest things about this game: Multiplayer. The entire quest can be played through with not just one friend, but two. If you have the super multi-tap and 3 controllers, you and 2 friends can experience this big, robust experience together, which is absolutely amazing. Just press start on another controller and you're immediately taking control of one of the companions. You're all gonna have to agree on where you go and what to buy and all that, and exploring towns and talking to villagers can be a bit dry, and at any point one of you can head into a house and drag everyone else in, but fighting is lots of fun. My best memories are playing this game 2-player with my brother, and it's what more or less secured its greatest game ever status in my mind. We hanging in there, folks? Good. Let's talk about the world design. Throughout your quest, you'll be moving through a number of environments that range from docile towns to provincial wilderness to castles, dungeons, sewers, and more. At the beginning, you're limited to where you can walk to, as well as to where the cannons can shoot you. But soon enough, you get access to Flammy, a giant Falcor-like white dragon that you can control and take anywhere on the world map. It's always amazing in an RPG when you get the airship or whatever and gain access to the entire world, and in this game it's no different. You can explore and find these little islands with secrets on them or revisit old areas. You're limited as to where you can land, which kinda makes sense since wherever you land has to be somewhere that the game is built out in detail. So no landing in forests or mountains. I do kinda wish they built out more little secret landing spots like this lighthouse, however. As a kid I spent so much time flying around landing where I could, hoping to find new secrets, and it would be great if the game rewarded that a bit more. Another small complaint I want to level at this game's design is that some environments are a little bit repetitive and you will get the feeling of deja vu. The mana palaces are palette swapped from one another, and you will start to get sick of them even if they have different layouts and enemies. Another cave? Okay then. And another zombie house? Listen, I totally get it though. Cartridge space is at a premium, and it's either this or a shorter game. And to be fair, this game does not feel padded in the slightest. There are tons of towns and palaces and environments to run around in. You're never made to traverse the same dungeon more than once, and there's enough exciting new stuff later in the game so it never feels like the second half is one big rehash. Check out this fight in a subway car that happens near the end. Where's Mike Hagar? Like the environments, the enemies don't repeat much at all. You're gonna get the palette swaps for sure, but you're still being introduced to new monsters near to the end of the game. Same goes for the bosses. My goodness, there are a lot of bosses. Probably too many bosses, actually. When you're fighting the third palette swap of the mech rider, you're just like, okay, come on. So, while I'm able to poke some holes here and there in the design of Secret of Mana, there's no denying that it was crafted with love and care and a genuine desire to put something unique out on the market, and in that regard, it succeeds. Okay, time to talk about whether good design actually translates to good gameplay. Well, it does, mostly. But if you're expecting perfect sword wax enemy responsiveness, you might find this game lacking. Normally, swinging your weapon at an enemy results in them getting hit and responding to that hit, but as your party gets bigger and you start dogpiling on the bad guys, who's hitting what and when can get super muddled. For example, after getting hit, some enemies seem to have invulnerability windows of sorts where you can't always hit them again. If you try, sometimes the hit won't register, which could be so annoying if you've charged up a big hit and right as you unleash it, one of your companions lands a weak hit before yours connects, thus nullifying it. But occasionally, if the enemy is reeling from a hit, all subsequent hits will damage stack, so that once they've played out the animation for the first hit, they get absolutely starched by all the follow-up hits rolled into one. Bam! On top of that, like in other RPGs, some enemies have a statistic that determines whether they can evade certain physical attacks, which is funny because since it's an action RPG, they could just, actually evade the attacks, instead of making it so your bang-on hit registers no damage. When your hits do connect, however, especially after a charge-up shot, they can feel nice and juicy. Ooh yeah! Eat shit, owls! Oh hey pumpkins, you want some of this too? Bam! Find me another game where you can crack a whip at a pumpkin and make it explode. As long as you're okay with balancing the awesome hits with the frustrating misses, you're really gonna like whacking things. Now I gotta talk about how they implemented magic here, and it's definitely one of those great in principle, iffy in practice situations. You select a spell and cast it, what's the deal? Well, what if you select the spell when your caster is already engaged in another animation, like being knocked down? What if there are like 2 other spells being cast at the same time? God bless this game for trying to keep up, but it will occasionally just go nope and refuse to cast the spell you selected. And this could be extra nerve-wracking when that spell is a crucial cure. Animations can go over top animations and mess with things, and you may see bizarre shit like this wall boss looking like an LSD nightmare. There's also like 0 cooldown time on spells. You can cast them one after the other faster than it takes your weapon gauge to fully replenish. What this means is that if you have enough magic, you can have the sprite just pummel a boss over and over with the same spell until they're dead, without anyone else getting a chance to do anything. Kinda makes for a boring and anticlimactic fight. Between the so-so hit detection and the overzealous magic system, it's safe to say it takes time to get a feel for the flow of the combat in this game. But that won't be a problem because you fight a lot. I've played through this game around 20 times and I've learned how to time my hits and spells to minimize all the weirdness I just mentioned. So you can too. While we're getting into the gripes, a lot of the gripes people have about this game has to do with the computer-controlled companions, so let's get into that. The root complaint is that they are just plain stupid, which I can agree with. They don't do a great job staying with you and often get stuck. Also, depending on where you place them on the action grid, they can range from being a useless wallflower to friggin' Leroy Jenkins barreling into certain doom. You also never get the option to get rid of them, so if they bother you in the slightest, too bad because you're stuck with them. Another reason to play this multiplayer, I guess. I should probably get into some of the good things about the gameplay, because I'm not exactly selling the fact that this is my favorite game of all time. Secret of Mana is really well balanced in terms of difficulty. If you're like me and you fight literally every enemy you come across, you'll have no problem leveling up to where you need to be in order to get through the next challenge. If you don't level up, however, you will get humbled real quick. If not by the normal enemies, then certainly by the bosses. But the good news is that you will rarely have to grind. Maybe just to bring up magic levels, but that's it. Sometimes challenge can rear its head in the form of not knowing where the hell to go to next, and there will be times when progression is locked behind some benign action like talking to this one girl here. I walked out of this throne room too early and flew around the world looking for where to go to next before realizing I had to go back to the throne room and talk to the king to move on from this particular event. But this is by no means a complaint exclusive to Secret of Mana, and in the age of the internet, it's almost moot. I also need to mention the fact that there is slowdown in this game, and this should come as no shock when there's a friggin' 5-layer bean dip of action being performed on screen at the same time. But when you're exploring a particularly big town and the game starts crawling, it can lessen the experience. So yeah, while the bulk of my and most people's complaints about Secret of Mana tends to be in the gameplay department, I won't let that de-rose the tint on these glasses, and quite frankly, with all the ambitious shit this game does, I am shocked it's not more of a mess. Talk about aiming high and hitting the mark. Okay, I'm really excited to get into the graphics because my dear weeping child of the heavens, this game is a sight to behold. They didn't bait and switch us with the box art because everything about this game evokes the beauty and mystery of nature. Shit, the box art even appears on the title screen. In the opening area, you're surrounded by lush foliage as you cross rushing streams on wooden bridges. There are ponds with lily pads and giant apple trees. When you enter a village, it becomes extra apparent just how much TLC was put into the environments. There are clusters of cottagey homes with moss-covered roofs. Head inside and there will be a tea set on the table and a roaring fire. As a kid, I really actually wanted to just live in Neko's house. Screw the quest, let's just hang out here. Other environments show the same level of detail and care, and many areas feel bespoke and not at all like a collection of tiles. While there are the expected recycled assets, they are clever about it. The Sand Village houses and Snow Village houses are palette swaps, but they both fit in so well to their environments. Even caves look good in this game. And when you hop on Flammy, the world looks great despite being a bit flat. Props to the developers for making the Mana Fortress float around like this, so if you want to land on it, you gotta chase it down. Wish they added a few more sprites and icons on the world map to give it a bit more depth though. When the Grand Palace rises out of the ground, we get the appearance of depth as we watch it directly from above, but when it's back to our usual view, whamp whamp. The characters that inhabit the world fit into it nicely, and they're suitably fun and detailed. We have Dancing Turban Guy, Zombie Denizen, Walrus Villager, Giant Head Person, Mr. Pants. As you can expect, you're not going to get unique sprites for each villager, and there's only so much palette swapping you can do, so we see a lot of repeats. But it's not like they half-assed it, and they added these fun little facial expressions for your main characters, which I appreciate. Enemies all look great, and their aesthetic is cutesy enough to go with the lighthearted feel of the game. Yep, just some cute little family-friendly bad guys to hey, whoa. What the hell did I just see in that book? A naked lady? Okay, someone's getting detention for that. But great enemies, and the same goes for the bosses, who are just as big and colorful. The Mana Beast is suitably epic with his Mode 7 fire charge. And oh, I need to talk about the magic effects, which actually can look different depending on what your magic level is for any given spirit. For example, Fireball eventually becomes Fire Dragons, Earth Slide starts off looking like this with the boulders getting bigger as you level Gnome up, culminating in Yeah! Alright, can we go back to the other one? Status effects get fun graphics. You don't just freeze, you turn into a snowman. You don't just get petrified, you turn into a naked cherub statue. And then there's moogling, which turns you into some kind of teddy bear. Look at this thing, it's adorable! There's even a whole village of them. And there's a little one! In my opinion, Secret of Mana Moogle is peak Moogle. Such amazing graphics in this game, and certainly a shining example of Square in top form. Oh, here we go. I don't know what it is about RPGs, but they always have the best soundtracks, and Secret of Mana is no exception. These songs are embedded deep in my nostalgia veins, so stop me if I'm gushing a little too hard here. Composed by Hiroki Kikuta, I'm surprised this game didn't make him a household name. The very first thing you hear when you boot the game up is this whale song. And honestly, this is such a great choice for setting the whole power and mystery of nature tone they're going for. This is followed up by the main theme, which you heard earlier in this vid. Awesome theme, but I love how it ends on something of a foreboding note. Listen. This profound air continues through the game itself in a few other songs, like this one, which plays inside the water palace. This one really stuck with me for some reason, and every time I hear it, it makes me feel like there's still more mystery to uncover in this game, even though I've played it to death. But this game knows how to loosen its tie a bit, don't worry. The town music is a friggin' bullseye that makes you want to wave to everyone on the way to the general store to buy milk. And the not-so-happy town music tells you something is up without giving away too much. Exploring the beautiful wilderness gets scored accordingly, and if I had to zoom in on one song, it would be when you're in the upper lands traversing the 4 seasons. Absolutely everyone remembers hearing this a bunch when trying to solve that spring to winter then back to spring again puzzle. The Zombie Ruins music deserves a mention for using gamelan to convey spookiness, which sure is an interesting choice. I'm glad they didn't opt for some hacky, spooky music, because what we get here is legitimately creepy. Oh my god, so many songs to show you. Flying Around on Flammy continues the RPG tradition of yay, freedom kind of music whenever you get an airship of some kind. But I also want to point out this banger that plays when you're flying around and seeing the Mana Fortress crashing about for the first time. And speaking of bangers, the fight with Thanatos on said fortress is scored perfectly, and it includes this little 9 Inch Nails perfect drug type breakdown. Yeah, this fight is the only time you hear this music, so it really is something of an ephemeral treat. All other regular boss fights get the same music, which really starts to get old after maybe the 9th boss. There are 6 bosses in the Pure Lands alone, so when you yet again hear that, you're just like, alright. And while we are on the musical cons, I have to bring up this stinky number, which is a little underwhelming considering it plays when you are storming the castle in the heart of the Empire. And let's not forget the Dwarf Village music. Lord of mercy, can you imagine the poor bastards that have to live underground with no sunlight listening to this 24/7? In all, there are 44 tracks on the Secret of Mana soundtrack, which is massive. They really didn't have to spoil us this much, but they did, and my childhood was made just a little bit better as a result. Sound effects are almost exclusively fighting sounds, and they do their job well. All weapons sound differently when swung, and enemy death sounds match their unique animations. Here's what it sounds like casting a spell. And there's a good array of follow-up sounds for each spell you cast. Leveling up sounds different depending on if it's your weapon, your spell, or yourself. I could do with a less intrusive sound when you're charging your weapon though, but no amount of complaints is going to make me give the audio anything less than a perfect score. Mwah. Which means it's value time. Can we just also give this a perfect score? I mean, here are some facts. 1. It's an RPG that boasts at least 25 hours of playtime if you smell the roses. 2. It's kinda cheap, coming in at around $40. 3. It's 3-player multiplayer. That alone puts it up there on the essential SNES list in my opinion. Yes, you can play it anywhere and generally for cheaper, so pay attention if that's what you want to do, and I'll tell you how you can do that. Come on. Okay, for one, you can get it on your smartphone, iOS or Android, and it boasts a few improvements to the script among other things. You can also get this awesome Collection of Mana bundle on the Switch, which also includes Final Fantasy Adventure, as well as Trials of Mana, which was the SNES sequel that shamefully was never released here in North America. Secret of Mana was also generously included on the SNES Classic Edition, along with a bundle of other amazing games. And finally, if you're down with remakes, you could play the 3D rendered Secret of Mana on your PS4, Vita, or PC.
We can't let him stay in the village anymore. He'll just bring more monsters.
Yeah, I don't know about this. Take me back. Alright, phew. Alright. Okay, that was tough, but I got through it. It's not easy finding the flaws in something you hold so dear. Secret of Mana carved new pathways of joy in my young mind. When I see that familiar box art or hear that startup whale song, pockets of dopamine light up in the deep, dormant recesses of my brain. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. Every so often, I go back and revisit this game to re-experience this warmth. And unlike super goddamn ghouls and goddamn ghosts, I will be happy to pick it up and play it again and again. And in my golden years, when I can't move around anymore and all food starts tasting the same, you'll probably see me wheeled in front of a CRT, whacking pebblers and kimono birds, feeding off of what's left of that dopamine. So with all that said, I'll give Secret of Mana a score, and what do you know, it's a Motron Games high of 9.8 out of 10. The imperfect gameplay is easily outweighed by the magnificent sights and sounds, as well as the sheer love and dedication that went into designing this wonderful experience. I encourage you to pick it up and see what all the fuss was about. Have fun.
Something shiny on the riverbed. Gonna pick it up and look at it. Didn't listen what the elder said. Couldn't ever really give a shit. Light shiny so bright, caught me in the eye. Monsters appear, kick me out of town. Leave me on my own to survive. Is there anything to fear? I can know the secret that will save the world. I'm a boy traveling with a sprite and a girl, having fun with the pebblers and kimono birds. Mana, 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 seal away the mana. I heard about the witch in the woods. I heard about the ship in the sand. I heard that I really, really should visit each palace of the land. Got a nice new drum from a mushroom man. But what does it do? Call the white dragon to lift me up and take me to the skies and help me to know the secret that will save the world. I'm a boy traveling with a sprite and a girl, having fun with the pebblers and kimono birds. Mana, 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 seal away the mana. Werewolves, zombies, lollipops and blacks. Chestnuts, tomato man, what you think of that? Nitro, pumpkin, Captain Duck, oh come on, what the hell? Ager grow pilon. Know the secret that